last week. Some people attended the first introduction, haven't attended other ones since, and vice versa. So not everybody knows who I am. So I am Peter Hill. If you already know that, I'm sorry, but otherwise, I've spent my life looking at amphibians and reptiles. My father was a Welshman and he was in the army. And I don't tell a lot of people this, but I was born down in England where he was stationed, and it was by the Southern Heathlands, which was full of all kinds of amphibians and reptiles, all the rarities that we don't get elsewhere. Natterjack toads, smooth snakes, sand lizards, and all the other widespread species. So I grew up fully immersed in that environment. I dug my first pond as an 8-year-old. That's not it. This is one in the garden now, but I haven't really stopped digging ponds since then. It's an amazing thing you can do for your garden, and it really did fuel my passion as a child, and carried on wandering around looking for reptiles then. So amphibians came first. They were my introduction to wildlife, and they are for many other people too. Very accessible. So before we really start talking about survey techniques for amphibians in the part of the world where we are, I'll also mention the natterjack briefly for you. We have got them in Wales. This one's not a Welsh one. This is a photograph taken by a gentleman called Howard Innes of a southern heathland natterjack toad. So Surrey or Dorset, something like that. Much darker animals. This is an animal I photographed myself. This is a paler animal because this lives in coastal sand dune habitat, not heathland. So it's different again. But this animal was photographed up in Flintshire in North Wales, where we've reintroduced them as part of the official reintroduction program, and they're doing pretty well. That's the male calling. There's a female, pretty animals, beautiful colours. She's full of spawn. Look at those tiny little back legs. They call them the running toad because they don't jump around like your abnormal frogs and toads. In fact, their ecology is so different to frogs and toads that you're familiar with. Best way to understand natterjacks is not to even try and compare them with how a common toad breeds, for example. And there's no better photograph to explain that than this, really. So you can see a pair of natterjacks in amplexus in the bottom left, a male and a female. You can see they're in really shallow water, which is not what you find common toads in. In fact, that's just a puddle, basically, a wet slack in a sand dune, and one of the inner ridges, pretty close to the frontals though. And that's just a bit of grass that they've wound the spawn strings around. But you can see the spawn strings there that have just been deposited. There's a pair in amplexus, and you can see quite well developed tadpoles as well about the place. So the common toad and the common frog as well, their breeding strategy, as you know, is explosive. They all hit the pond, the water body at the same time, mass numbers. It's pretty much an amphibian orgy, but it's to inundate predators with sheer numbers so that some survive. Natterjacks are different, and their spawning period is very protracted. It's got a very long, drawn-out breeding season in natterjack compared to the instant hit of the common frog and common toad, the explosive breeding strategy. So, and they need warmer temperatures. So these shallow pools that get very warm very quick, late April, May, June, even July, you get males calling, and females will come as and when throughout the season. There might not be a female at all one evening, another evening there may be 2 or 3, like you saw the one in the last picture. So it's an extended, protracted breeding season, and you'll see tadpoles at different stages of development. Very, very different animals to the common toad. They also forage in much different habitat. They need really short grass or bare sand because they literally hunt in a very different way. They'll run down and chase beetles and insects that they can see on the bare sand or the very short grass. Remember, they're the running toad, so they don't like dense vegetation at all. They live in little burrows in the sand, okay, next to the slacks. So here's a pair spawning. Can you see how the male's positioned his toes so he can feel the spawn string passing over his toes, so he knows exactly when to release the sperm into the water. Quite a clever maneuver. And you can see the spawn string being deposited in a double helix, double strand, double row, as you can see. Looks a bit like common toad spawn, but it doesn't stay like that. This is a few days later. You can see it breaks down into a single helix, which is differentiates it from common toad spawn. Okay. So surveying amphibians doesn't necessarily mean handling amphibians, so we really want to avoid doing it unless absolutely necessary. Some research involves handling, for example, or translocations in the case of some consultancy. But with you guys, in the main, it's voluntary surveying, finding out what's there and how they're doing. So we really don't want to be handling unless absolutely necessary. As we spoke about, like it was last week, our dry, salty hands are not what amphibians' porous skin need to be in contact with, and it can damage the protective mucus layer, which leaves them very vulnerable to infections, which is a critical thing these days. We can also contaminate them with stuff on our hands, oils, anything, basically. Who knows what people have got on their hands. And the actual act, aside from the skin, the actual act of handling amphibians itself is stressful for the animals. And if animals are stressed, they have a higher risk of infection. Please don't use latex gloves. So powder-free vinyl gloves. There's lots of different types. If you type in powder-free, if you're researching, they're considered the best practice. Wet the gloves if the pond water where you work in prior to handling the animals. Okay. So, yeah, powder-free disposable vinyl gloves, rinse in the pond water for contact. See these guys, they're actually, the reason they're handling these amphibians is because they are swabbing to test for the presence of chytridiomycosis, the fungal pathogen. So it's entirely necessary work. Use a single set of gloves on the site, apart from if it becomes damaged, of course, but please dispose and use different ones between sites. This is all about biosecurity. Your equipment, any footwear, literally anything that's been in contact with water that you can use elsewhere must be disinfected between sites. That's about biosecurity. And so chytridiomycosis, I mentioned earlier, or chytrid fungus, that's affected amphibians drastically across the globe. Mass die-offs, plenty of other diseases. There's also amphibian herpes, etc. There's all kinds of stuff. So we need to check anything that's been in contact with water, even vehicle tires. If we've got that close in four-wheel drive vehicles, preferably don't do that. Nets and equipment, anything that's been in contact with the water. Okay, boots and clothing. If you're visiting a pond, more than one pond within a 1 kilometre area, then it's pointless doing that because that's as far as amphibians are going to travel anyway. But if anything that's further than a kilometre away, you need to absolutely make sure everything's been disinfected before you go to the next site and right. So be aware of high risk sites. Non-native species present is high risk. So we've got alpine newts there, not aware of any Talbot County or nearby. We've got them in Ceredigion. There's a marsh frog there, not aware of any of those yet in Wales. So veterinary disinfectants you can use. Vircon's the favorite. Everybody seems to like that. It's easy to get hold of. No need to get quite so much as that. You can buy it in tablet form, which is really handy and useful. Just use one tablet at a time. Alternatively, you can use a 4% bleach spray, but it seems a lot of fuss to go to, and it's just easy to get Vircon, I'd say. Please don't, when you wash it away. I carry a brush and two basically gorilla buckets in the boot of my vehicle or the van, and one's for when we arrive and one's for when we leave, basically. And I've got everything I need there to wash, water in an enclosed container as well, like when you go camping, for example. So I've got everything I need there to wash it. Please don't pour it down the drain when you're finished. You need to find something porous like gravel or a grassy area or something to pour it away like that, not down the drainage system. Right, I don't know what's going on here. Here we are. So also, biosecurity helps with invasive plants. Okay, these can be a real issue. So the main culprits, crashula, which I'm sure everyone's heard about, parrot's feather, and the zolla, water fern. Look at those three main culprits in more detail, but there are others. Says garden centre invasives, not just garden centres, so aquatic suppliers, pet shops, etc. I was very disappointed to see on the television not so long ago, primetime viewing, with lots of people watching, to remain nameless who it was, but somebody extolling the virtues of putting Canadian pondweed in your garden pond, so Alodia densa. Please don't do that. There's plenty of natives that will do the job. But let's have a look a bit more closely at these three main culprits. That's crashula. Again, that was aquarium trade import from the 50s, believe it or not. That can really completely swamp out a pond, blocking all the light to it. Got an instance of that at the moment, not too far away, that we're trying to deal with. Parrot's feather, beautiful looking plant, does the same thing, completely takes over a pond very quickly. Myriophyllum aquaticum. And the zolla, there's lots of different species, but this is the one most likely. Water fern, mosquito fern, fairy moss, it's referred to as common names. It forms a floating mass and spreads really quickly. It's edible and it's quite popular. People are actually farming it in other parts of the world, and so it shows you how productive it can be, but we don't want it in our ponds. There's a nightmare pond somewhere with all three species present. That's not a good prospect for that pond. So let's finally start to look at survey methods after all the doom and gloom of precautions. So amphibians are most commonly easily detected and more apparent when they're in the aquatic phase, when they're breeding. So vast majority of methodologies are conducted during that aquatic phase for amphibians. Bottle trapping is the one there that is for the professionals, which I wouldn't want anybody who's just going to be doing voluntary surveying to get involved with. You can do fine with just with the other three. Refuge searching is a good supplementary technique. Pitfall trapping is another one, which is for the professionals. Really only needs to be done in certain situations. Please don't worry about doing any of that at the moment. So, like we said, most easy time, obvious to survey amphibians is when they're in the water. They're more apparent. So they're in the water for one reason, and that's to breed. This is a bunch of predominantly male common frogs, and you can see the difference there. We're talking about the natterjack toad earlier. This is explosive breeding strategy. Animals everywhere all at the same time. That's predominantly males waiting for females. I think I can see one female there to the top right in amplexus, but they're literally all croaking and scanning for movement. And if another female arrives, they'll all pounce on her straight away. But they're there for one thing, and that's to breed. So for surveying for frogs and toads, the commonest species, it's easy with frogs. There's your window, January through to March. So when I was a child many years ago, half a century ago, frogs would spawn the first week of March without fail, and toads would spawn early to middle April without fail. That was a long time ago, and with climate change, there's a significant difference. Now, frogs can spawn anytime from January through to March. If you're down in Devon, Cornwall, December. This isn't good for them because it kind of defeats the object of the explosive strategy of inundating predators with sheer numbers, because nowadays it seems to be more protracted and inconsistent. So that's not good for them either. But easy to spot in shallow water. Multiple clumps form what we call spawn mats. And when you're submitting your records, you can talk about the size of the mat, an estimation. Toad spawn nowadays, February through to April, harder to spot, and it's generally wound around the stems of reeds in deeper water, as you can see there. And you can see the double row, double helix, different to natterjack spawn that we looked at earlier. The tadpoles of common frogs, not black at all. You can see in that picture there, but they vary greatly. Olives, tans and browns, lots of speckling, pinkish speckling sometimes, very obvious golden eye. Common toad tadpoles, different again. They look to be black at first glance, but when you look closely, they're more like a very, very dark brown. There's no speckling, there's uniform color all over, and no obvious golden eye. And as we talked about previously, the behavior is very different. Common toad tadpole shoal. Okay. Metamorphs, common frogs, easy to identify in my opinion. Look at those muscly back legs on the one that's just on the left, hasn't absorbed its tail yet, but very athletic, muscly legs for jumping. There's a toad metamorph by comparison, looks really skinny, very, very weak back legs by comparison. They look underdeveloped. They're also a mass emergence. They're much more synchronized when they emerged than the frogs. Newts is a bit more involved looking for their eggs, okay, but it's a good survey technique. So it's always in submerged vegetation, and the top left there, that's your classic how you find a leaf that a newt's used to attach eggs. All the species do it like this. Just below it, you can see where the fold where it's been unfolded to show you the egg. And you can see straight away it's a great crested newt because it's very, very pale, almost white. And there's the comparison in the bottom right between great crested newt and either of the other two species. So very easy to differentiate at that stage. This is an example of how great crested newts can utilize overhanging vegetation as well as submerged vegetation. So this is, would you believe it, one of the tannery pits at the Museum of Welsh Rural Life. And you can see there's a great crested newt egg. We've hooked the bramble out to find it. It was submerged where it's overhanging into the water, and we'd had the heavy rains. But the newts are laying their eggs in this instance on the leaves of overhanging vegetation, bramble, not that fussy. That's a classic example. I think that's a water forget-me-not leaf. You can just see the impression of an egg on the top left there where it's folded over. Various plants are used. There's water mint, I think that is. That looks like overhanging grass, which has been folded repeatedly, concertina effect with lots of eggs. Underside of another a submerged vegetation, you can see the egg on the far right, and you can see the fold underneath it where it was previously folded, but the person has unfolded it to show it you for the photograph. On the left, dying vegetation, decaying vegetation is also used. You can see that's like a concertina fold. It's been folded multiple times, probably with an egg in each fold. On the right, underneath of submerged leaves, some mothers are better than others. Some do a better job of folding the leaves than others. Here's an example again of overhanging grass. So grass that's growing terrestrially that's overhanging into the water. And of course, in the spring when the newts are breeding, you often have higher water levels following heavy rains. And so here the female newt, great crested newt, has attached multiple eggs, one at a time, to a piece of overhanging grass, and you can see where she's folded each one. These have been unfolded for the photograph. Yeah, you know what to look for. Focus on newly laid eggs, as you saw earlier, very easy to differentiate them. Much harder to identify once the larvae take shape. So the advantages of egg searching, it's a quick method, don't need any equipment. It's easy to differentiate between the species of the eggs. And my favorite consideration, it's a low level of disturbance. Hasn't got much value for determining population size. Okay, but it's definitely confirms present. Okay. Netting, one of my least favorite methodologies because of the disturbance. You need a good sturdy net for doing it. Work around the pond perimeter, what's accessible, of course. 2 meter lengths at a time. Keep it like into segments like that. Agitate the net through aquatic vegetation in a 2 meter arc. Now, if it's necessary, please do, but this is the bit I don't like. I don't like to agitate aquatic vegetation in the spring when everything's breeding and laying their eggs in it, etc. So if you can establish the presence of great crested newts by doing an egg search, then you really don't need to do this. Okay. Netting open water is less effective than netting in vegetation. Very true. However, from childhood upwards, I developed a bit of a technique. I guess I was like a heron standing at the edge of the ponds there with my net. So newts come up for water, take a gulp of air, quite often out in open areas of water, and then they swim back down to the bottom. So I got quite adept at sticking my net in at the right point as they swam down straight into the net. So you can do netting in open water on occasion. Advantages. You get a close-up look at the animals for accurate identification with your pond dipping trays. Pretty long season, and you can do it in the daytime. Need a sturdy net, which is quite expensive. It's very hard. You've got to be lucky to get a great crested newt in the daytime, other than perhaps a female who might be laying eggs and don't really want to be disturbing those. Biggest disadvantage for me is it's a significant disturbance to the pond at, in my opinion, pretty much the most inappropriate time of year you could be doing it. And there is a risk of transfer of plants, invasive plant species, diseases from one pond to another. That's why your biosecurity has to be implemented. Please don't do it like this. Look what these people are doing to this pond. Please just consider the animals at all times and why you're there. It's a conservation ethic. It's these people are clearly haven't given much thought and they've got carried away with enthusiasm in the moment. It's not what we want to be doing. Refresher for you, differentiating between larvae once the eggs hatch and start to develop. They're initially very poor swimmers and hard to detect, but later on in the year, say about June, depending on each year, of course, depending on what kind of season we're having, you start to get larvae that are more obvious to see. So you've got the great crested newt there at the top, that larvae. We looked at them last week. Underneath, you've got either one of the smaller, commoner species, Lissotriton, either the smoother common newt or the palmate newt. Doesn't matter which one. The point is you can tell them apart from the great crested newt. So look at the differences. Very obvious golden eye with the great crested newt larvae. Very obviously concave, curved, feathery gills compared to the straighter gills below. Look at the feet. Look at the digits on the feet. The great crested newt larvae, really long, noticeably long, spindly digits compared to the more normal looking length of the toes of the animal below. And the speckling, that black speckling on the tail finnage on the great crested newt. Also the general shape. So that kind of arch back looking shape of the fin is what helps it with the dynamics of suspending itself floating higher in the water column. The Lissotriton larvae at the bottom, they don't behave like that. They're more designed to swim when needed, but spend their life crawling through vegetation or crawling through the benthos, the mud layer at the bottom, not floating around like the great crested newt larvae at the top. Here's some great crested newt larvae, quite well developed in a pond dipping tray. This is in Bridgend County. Look how big and wide those heads are. And in the top right, you can see Lissotriton larvae very wisely getting the hell out of there because they would quite easily swallow that. And in fact, shouldn't keep them in a pond dipping tray together like that. for any longer than necessary. I think they'd literally just been tipped out of the net, photographed, and then separated. But you can also see those very obviously those curved gills on the animal on the bottom left there. Okay, classic, pretty well developed great crested newt larvae, bottom two left. You might also encounter overwintering larvae. This is a Lissotriton species, probably smooth newt. And look at the very pale coloration of that individual. They're incredibly diverse. Torching. As we know, newts are primarily nocturnal, in particular great crested newts. It's a good method as you can count how many's there, rough count, okay? March to May, so now is a good period, the start of it. Warm, still evenings. Obviously avoid wind, rain, or low temperatures. Wind can really affect the surface of the water as well, make it hard to look through, as does rain, sorry. In the late summer, early autumn, you can detect the larvae, great crested newt larvae, as discussed. They're easy to see floating and hanging there high in the water column. Scan 2-meter sections at a time, moving the torch away from the bank. Repeat all the accessible areas of the pond, and please make a note of what percentage of the pond perimeter was accessible and what wasn't. There you go. So we can try and work out percentages then. So make sure you survey in the daytime beforehand, because for obvious reasons, you can identify potential hazards. And please use a survey buddy. Please don't do it by yourself. It's very easy to tell the difference between the species when you're torching, and you get that obvious tail flash. If you remember when we did the ID presentation, that white tail flash, the last third of the tail on the male, that really does show up. Even if they just shoot off straight away, you can recognize that instantly. Yeah, and count how many newts you see, estimated. Pretty powerful torch is what you need. We use 1,000,000 candle power. They're quite chunky and heavy. There is a modern version with lithium batteries, which are a lot more expensive than that, but they're very light. I really like torching. It's my favorite method because it's the least disturbance you can have on the pond in the newts. Yeah, they might be disturbed and swim away, but you haven't done anything to the habitat. And others don't swim away. When you start doing it, you'll see what I mean. They behave differently. It's a very quick survey method. The disadvantages are it's got to be done after dark, so the obvious associated health and safety issues. As we said, you've got to pick your weather conditions properly. If you're too far away, you can't necessarily differentiate, but like we said, let's just keep it the 2-meter arcs. That's what you want to be doing your survey in, sections at a time. And obviously you can't do it in more murky or turbid ponds or very overgrown ponds. And they might be murky or turbid after somebody's been netting earlier on, or if dogs have been in the water, okay? So here's a little story about torching. So that's me banging on about having shallow drawdown zones in ponds, and you can see how deep it is and how far I am there, my wellies. I'm just showing people that we need extensive shallows around the ponds. That was at a course that we delivered for people who wanted to know more about great crested newts and become accredited agents on ARC's organizational survey license, which means they can legally do voluntary surveys for great crested newts, basically. So we held the training back in March. It was about this time last year, possibly a week later. Anyway, we had the meeting end of the afternoon. We had to walk around, and here I am showing them a pond that we dug a month earlier. So we just finished digging this pond just at the end of February 2025. This is middle of March 2025, this picture, and you can see there's no vegetation anywhere. It's just exposed clay all the way around the edge. You can see the big heaps of brash and logs everywhere. So this was an area the size of half a football pitch, and we got a license for it. We had tree officers to look at it, bat surveys done, etc. It was just a mixture of dying ash, which was a shame, a lot of old spruce, some of it quite big spruce, and some gnarly old tangled up goat willow. And it wasn't a huge amount of biodiversity value there. And with the dash dieback as well, it didn't have much future in its current state. So it was right on the edge of open habitat, as you can see there. We saw hares, brown hares in the field there when we were working. But it's also not far away from existing ponds in which great crested newts were residing. So we thought, well, at least I thought this would be the place, one of the places to put a pond. So we did. So we did this training, end of the afternoon, went to have a look at the pond. Then we went in as it started to become dark. We did all the training similar to what you guys have done online. And when we'd finished that, we all had a cup of tea and it was dark, and we went out and did a torch survey, not on this pond, on the pre-existing ponds. Here's some people looking very excited. We found all 3 species of newts there, and this pond. This is a pond that I surveyed 12 years ago and had a count of 200 plus great crested newts in it. See everyone getting very excited there. We thought we'd also, as an afterthought, go and have a look at the pond that is less than a month old. So basically a big muddy hole in the ground full of water, no plants, surrounded by mud. Let's go and check it out. It's the right time of year. Newts might be traveling around checking it out. It's been raining. It's the first mild wet night of the year. Let's go and check it out. So we did, and we had to tread carefully. There's a great crested newt female right at the edge of the new pond. As you can see, just bare clay, bare exposed clay. No vegetation at all. She was checking out the new pond, along with plenty of others. These people had really good views. It was a really good course, actually, because they had all the online theory with photographs, death by PowerPoint beforehand in the early evening. And then I took them out and they saw this situation where they could see all 3 species of newt together to compare. So it was the perfect way to do it. It was only a few hours in total, afternoon, evening training, bit of torching after dark. Everyone really enjoyed it, and we saw lots of newts. And I was very encouraged that all 3 species of newts were investigating a pond that we dug 3 weeks earlier. Here you go, right at the edge. You can see a male great crested newt and see that white tail flash at the end I mentioned. You can see him heading off out of sight. They look very different under torchlight. They look very pale compared to how black they look in the daytime. And you can see the blotches, which might confuse some people with the polka dots on a smooth newt, but they're very different animals. You can see his spiky crest, jagged crest, not undulating, and you can see the break in the crest just above the rear legs there. And there's a female closer to us. Pond 3 weeks old, and they were checking it out. Here's a little video. I don't know if it will work. Let's hope it does. This was taken by someone during the training there. As you can see, this is the brand new pond, just bare mud, a few dead leaves, and newts, and a few invertebrates that are starting to colonize. So hopefully this works. I've left the excited chitter chatter of the course attendees there for you to listen to. So yeah, that's a nice little video for you. I hope you saw that. Bottle trapping. This is a methodology for the professionals again as well, really. It's something it's a methodology that, in my opinion, is possibly overused. There'd be instances where you could conduct a torch survey when you wouldn't need a bottle trap. However, sometimes you'll get ponds that are so overgrown with so much vegetation, you've got no chance of seeing a great deal when you're torching. Or it might be turbid water, cloudy water, rain, wind, etc. In those instances, we often will use bottle trapping if we think it's worthwhile. It is, however, a lot more onerous and potentially dangerous than torching or other methodologies. There's all kinds of risks. So there's a few bottle traps you can see. I can see 4. If you look in the water, you can see the air bubble, the reservoir of air at the end of the bottle trap. So basically one end of, imagine a Coke bottle or lemonade bottle with the top part cut off and inverted basically, and you run a stake all the way through both sections when it's inverted at the one end, and it's tilted like that. When you put it in the water, push it down, soaks up water, and you've got an air reservoir. Now, how on earth does that catch newts? Well, newts they're very much investigative. They like to investigate recesses because that's what they're designed to do. Look, hunt down prey, look in nooks and crannies. So they will look inside and they can't necessarily work out how to get back out again. Later on in the season, when there's lots of females that are receptive, releasing pheromones in the water, if you catch a female, then of course the pheromones from the trap are going to lure in lots of males, so potentially the trap can get filled up. They're difficult to spot, as you can see. So this is an example of really how not to put your traps out, because there's no flags on the tips. I much prefer to put flags on the tips so you can find them again. Little subtle ones, but ones that you'll recognize. Unfortunately, unfound traps can be left out and just continually trap wildlife with no chance of it escaping. Okay, so you need to know how many traps have been put out and the same amount are brought back in. That's why I like to flag them. There's also another consideration. If there's water shrews used in the area, then if they get in a bottle trap, they will die. They've got such fast metabolisms, they've got no chance of being alive by the time you empty the trap. So there's a measure you can take if they're present, and that's making a little hole at the end that they can escape from at the top. Okay. Obviously you can only set it where it's not completely submerged in the water. You can see there's an air reservoir with these ones. If you've got a hole in it, you have to make sure it's at the top. You will lose the occasional newt, but you won't kill any water shrews. Okay. Advantages, you do get a really good close-up look, obviously. I like bottle trapping in certain situations where you can't do torching. So if it's thick with weeds or it's turbid and you can't see through the water, it's good because you get a close-up look. And the reason I like it best of all, I guess, is because apart from literally poking a stick in the pond, there's not much disturbance. Okay. Lots of disadvantages. So high risk of killing adults, larvae, and other species as well. Risk of vandalism and interference. It's logistically onerous. It is a nuisance. You've got to get up really early in the morning, etc., and carry around lots of pop bottles on sticks. Okay, it is quite awkward. Obviously, you can't do it in lined ponds. You'll puncture it. Okay. And there's the welfare issues. So obviously, colder water, the colder the temperatures, the more oxygen's in the water. So ideal time all around for activity and the welfare issues in March, April, where you can leave your trap set for a maximum of 12 hours. Okay, then this reduces as temperatures change. I really wouldn't want to be setting bottle traps at those times of year, if I'm perfectly honest. And it can go wrong if left too long, especially if you've got, like I said, a lot of males trapped in together. Now, the picture I'm about to show you is very unpleasant. It was taken by a consultancy down the south of England. I don't know who it was, no idea. But Obviously, the trap was left for too long. The consequences are disastrous. Lots of dead newts. Okay, so it's not something to be taken lightly. It's a really good method when it's done properly, in circumstances where necessary. But in my opinion, it's overused when you could just do a torch survey in a lot of instances. It can be very successful, although this crazy looking dude is Dr. Trenton Garner. He works for the Disease Research and Analysis section, part of the Zoological Society of London. And here he was with me in Ceredigion, bottle trapping invasive alpine newts, which we found to be vectors of chytridiomycosis, which wasn't good. It was the best method to catch as many as we could to test and find out about them. This is a volunteer who used to work with me, Sam Kelly. Here she is with a bottle trap, as you can see, full of alpine newts. Okay, and that was one of many, many traps. Bottle trapping can be good for training. This is me checking it very early in the morning. We just set some traps at some ponds in Porthcawl, would you believe? And these are various different volunteers and consultants that wanted to know more about bottle trapping. And you can see some great crested newts in our little tray there. Nice and early in the morning, not too long in the traps. Healthy looking female great crested newts. There's eDNA testing, environmental DNA testing. It's developing and evolving constantly. It can be very effective at proving presence. Not so reliable for proving absence, I have found. What am I talking about? Well, a heron, for example, can visit a pond of great crested newts, feed upon great crested newts, fly off somewhere else, regurgitate the great crested newts to attract fish or what have you, which could provide a positive test, and people might think they're there when they're not. Okay, so there are elements that might possibly go wrong for it, but it is a developing science. There's a lot more that's been developed since it first came out. There's some things there for you to investigate should you want to go further. There's a lot of promise for it. I prefer to actually set eyes on the newts themselves, so you can't use it for accessing numbers. But it's good to find out a confirmed presence. It was very useful for us in a couple of situations in the past when access was difficult, just to find out if newts were using ponds that we created. Terrestrial refuge searching, so looking under rocks, logs, any kind of discarded debris. You'd be surprised where they might turn up, where moisture is retained. It hasn't got to be sopping wet. March to October, so a long season. It's very much a hit and miss affair, and it's a supplementary technique only. However, there's been many times when I've found great crested newts at a site in the daytime when I would have been hard pushed to find them in the aquatic phase at night, in the day. So here they are on a dry stone wall. People have said to me, why does a moisture-loving amphibian like a dry stone wall? Well, underneath it in the wall, it's very humid, but it's not sopping wet. It's exactly how they want it. There's a bit of substrate in there. You can see soil as well. When the lid's on, it's humid in there. Okay. They will turn up in all kinds of places. This is an irrigation control box on a golf course in Porthcawl. They regularly find great crested newts in there. This is a more typical situation where you've got a male great crested newt at the bottom with an immature toad, looks like a female on the right. So great crested newts, they do spend a bit of time in and out of the pond. Like I said, they're very nocturnal, and this photograph was taken during the breeding season, middle of March. You can see it's an adult, fully mature great crested newt. All the defining features: warty skin, white speckling on the flanks. You can see the toes, the stripy toes, and you can see his crest. So he hasn't absorbed his crest because he's just popping back in the water in the evening. So he spent the day underneath a log. The Lissotriton species, the smaller newt species, don't tend to do this. They stay in the water for the period. But great crested newts will hop in and out for different reasons. Here's some very wet looking newts, and the top one you can see still got full crest flopped over, found underneath a refuge right next to the pond in the daytime. These are actually in the one and only Neathport Talbot site. Here's another one later on in the year. So this is a male, but he hasn't got such an obvious crest. It might be later on in the year. He's got a very full belly. He might be hopping in and out of water just to feed. Sometimes in the summer, it's a lot easier for a newt to feed aquatically with blooms or clouds of daphnia, etc., than it is on land. Here's somebody checking a refuge with some exclusion fencing, probably part of either research or mitigation with consultancy. It can be productive. Lots of GCN there, some lithotritons and a toad. This is obviously isn't how they were found. This is how they're put up for the photograph. And then pitfall trapping is another terrestrial survey methodology, not one I want you to investigate. This is just a mention about it. It's something that's used in certain studies and in mitigation, sometimes translocation. Lots of disadvantages, prone to vandalism and interference, prone to predation as well. Yeah, we'll leave that at that. Just had to mention it. So I hope you've picked up some useful stuff here. There's your photograph credits. Let's have some questions. I have spoken to a few of you already by email about possible surveys, matching you all up to the locations. I don't think it's going to be too difficult. What we need to do is get you survey buddies so you're not going out alone. But okay, I'm going to stop sharing if I can find the right button. There we go.
Fab, thank you, Pete. A lot of information there. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop your camera and mic on, or you can put them in the chat. It's totally up to you. I've had an email from Dan, because for some reason, I don't know why the chat doesn't seem to be letting people upload photos. So if I share my screen quickly, he sent me a couple of photos. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So he says it's what I think might be a female palmate that I found under a wheelie bin in work. But he just would like you to confirm ID for him if possible. So that's the underside.
That whereabouts was this? Was this in Neathport Talbot?
Yeah, he was up in Abercregan.
Can I see that other picture?
Yeah.
Can we zoom in a bit? Is that possible?
Try to go full screen. So I think I can zoom in more than that.
It's got a very speckly belly. I'm just trying to look at its throat. It's, you know, with photographs, it's so difficult. Would you describe that as opaque or translucent? It looks quite solid, doesn't it?
I don't know. Hard to
It seems
say.
to have the nodes on the back of the feet, which seem to be a different colour.
At the base of the two digits, the furthest apart digit, like the thumb kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you want me to go back to the other one?
No, I'm trying to focusing on that. I'm looking at the back feet.
I can send you the email if you want.
Yeah, that would be better. I wouldn't like to save with that one at the moment without a closer look. So.
Okay. Well, they are notoriously difficult to identify, so. I'll forward you the email now, Pete.
Thank you.
I don't think we've got any other questions in the chat.
That's cool.
I did have a question earlier, but now I've forgotten what it was. Let me just forward you this email while I remember. So I mean, it would just be between a palmate and a common?
Oh goodness, yeah, it's lithotriton. The thing is, I don't give sweeping statements about identifying those two species with photographs because they can hybridize. And
okay.
I've found them myself. I've got photographs of them. And that particular animal did have more speckling than average for a palmate.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's not a palmate, but
Right.
it's got more speckling than average. And I was struggling to tell whether the skin on the throat was translucent or opaque. Here comes your email.
We do have another question in the chat in the meantime, if you're happy to answer, Pete. Vicky has asked, do you know why the eDNA window is shorter than the standard survey window?
That's a really good question. Offhand, oh no, wrong email, sorry. I honestly can't remember what it is because I don't do a great deal of eDNA. I can find out more for you, but I think it's something to do with the effectiveness, amount of DNA in the water and temperatures and stuff like that. When it was being piloted to begin with, I know they had lots of inaccuracies after June. Don't ask me how or why, but we can find out more about that. Sorry, I haven't got the definitive answer at the moment.
Thank you. I remembered what my question was now. It was when you were talking about how sort of climate change is having a negative impact on frogs because of their explosive reproduction strategy. So I was just wondering, what is it that triggers them to breed? Because if it's temperature, you would think that all of the frogs in a a relatively local area would be triggered by the same temperature. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's perplexing. It's perplexing. So the first mild wet days is when it all starts.
Yeah.
I know of a part of Swansea that I lived in for a while when I'd have frogs in my garden pond and my neighbour within walking distance didn't. But it was colder. He was down in a hollow, and his frogs would always spawn about 2 weeks after mine did. But I could literally walk to his house in half an hour. So yeah, we don't know the answers to everything, and climate change will benefit some species in some ways and not in others. But yeah, with the frogs, they've just got so many nails in the coffin that extending their season to protracted breeding season, it doesn't help them at all. It makes them more vulnerable. Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you. Right, well, we don't have any more questions, so I think we will leave it there if everybody's happy. So thank you all for coming. I will upload this recording next week, and yeah, please come along to the next one, which is going to be, I'm not actually sure which one's next. I know we're moving on to reptiles. That's all I know.
I think we're moving on to reptiles, aren't we? I think.
Yeah.
Is it lizards first?
Lizards, maybe. Yeah.
Possibly.
Cool. Okay, great. All right. Well, tune in to find out, I suppose. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Cheers.
Thanks, Pete. Bye.